I love it. All right, let's
Yeah.
move on and let's talk about the Milwaukee Brewers. This is a team that looked really good last year for about 85, 90% of the season. The final 10%, if you will, was, I mean, complete trash. Let's just be completely honest with ourselves here. I don't even know what happened. This team just fell off the face of the earth and didn't find themselves into the playoff race. It was like it was a dream come true for a team like the Cardinals with Molina and Pujols last season. However, the Brewers did not look good. Basically, ever since they traded away the reliever in the offseason or in the trade deadline, I'm sorry, when all of that happened with Josh Hader, it kind of just untangled, if you will. And I know that's not one player isn't the complete glue to a team, especially from your bullpen. However, it did seem that way, Steve or Sean, doesn't it?
It absolutely did, and you do, you never think that removing one player from a roster, is what causes a team's collapse. But you're absolutely right. Trading Josh Hader had this kind of ripple effect, and at the time, I remember thinking, as a fan, I'm like, "Oh my God, what are you doing?" Like you're trading Josh Hader, the best reliever of the last 5 years at least, and you're
Right.
trading him. But on paper, it looked fine, right? Because you've got Devin Williams, who's been almost as good as Hader himself,
They're better.
right? So, yeah, so on paper, it was like, okay, this is a baseball move. I get it. Sometimes those on paper moves end up to blow up in your face. And I think that's kind of what happened last year with Milwaukee. So this is their chance, though, now this offseason to kind of rework things and try and make another run for it. But I'm confused as to how that's going to happen given their offseason so far.
Yeah, the offseason so far is, I would say, a big question mark, and it makes you think. It truly makes you think that they are on their way to a rebuild because of the moves that they have truly made so far. So, for
Mm-hmm.
example, they haven't added anybody in free agency that wasn't considered a trade, right? So, no actual free agent acquisitions. They did lose Taylor Rogers to San Francisco. He joins his twin brother over the Giants. Jace Peterson goes to Oakland. He was a pretty solid utility player for him. We already talked about Brad Boxberger going to the Cubs, good guy in the bullpen. And Trevor Gott was fantastic for him last year. He found himself, he kind of had a prove it year in Milwaukee. He gets himself a contract in Seattle. As for, they still added and subtracted as well with some trades. They probably were the most active team in all of baseball so far when it comes to the trade market. They got a catcher, Peyton Henry from Miami. They traded away Hunter Renfroe to the Angels, which I thought was a very confusing move, if you will. They traded for some arms, and then they also traded Colton Wong to Seattle for Jesse Winker and Abraham Torren Hernandez. And then also, last but not least, truly not last but not least, they were part of that wild 3-team trade with
Yeah.
Atlanta and Oakland. And I think they won that one. I don't know how they got themselves into that consideration, but they got William Contreras and then also got Owen Miller from Cleveland later on in the season. They made a lot of additions and trades. I just don't understand why they got rid of Hunter Renfroe. The Colton Wong one, just based on what I've heard from Milwaukee writers and Milwaukee fans, I think that was a time to take care of that one. I think his time in Milwaukee was ready to go. So I guess I understand that one. But losing Hunter Renfroe, then gaining Jesse Winker, you could call that maybe a wash, if you will. But one thing that Milwaukee really struggled with, not just last year, but it's been about 2 to 3 years, ever since Yelich has been down in the dumps, is offensive production. And getting rid of a guy like Hunter Renfroe can't be good for that, Sean. Not one bit whatsoever.
No, and I was looking at their lineup, and when you remove Hunter Renfroe from it, there's 30 home runs, and the only other guy to come close to that is Rowdy Tellez. And if your offense is relying on Rowdy Tellez, who's a former Blue Jay, so I can speak fairly confidently when I say this, that if your offense is entirely dependent on Rowdy Tellez, you've got problems, which makes me, like you, it makes me turn to the starting rotation, because if the
Right.
Milwaukee Brewers were serious about a rebuild, they could do it in very short order
Very
if
quick.
they were to dip into that starting rotation.
It's
You know,
arguably the best rotation in baseball.
yeah, yeah, and they don't have the offense to go with it. That's the unfortunate part, right? And so maybe, and given, I mean, Christian, think about how much starting pitching is going for. in the quote unquote open market, or in trades or whatever, right? Like this is a time that if Milwaukee were to seriously consider it, but if they are, then you don't make a move like bringing in Jesse Winker. There's my, that's is why the Milwaukee Brewers are confusing me right now. I just don't know what they're doing, right? Because if they're going to rebuild, cool, I can get on board. I can see it, and I can see a path to making it very quick. If they're not, then I'm actually more confused because I don't see how what they're doing is making them that much more competitive than they were last year.
Yeah, there are some pretty decent prospects that are coming up through the system in
Yep.
Milwaukee that, obviously we saw Jackson Torino, who has been just outstanding. I got the opportunity to watch him for the Carolina Mudcats last season when he was in low A. And then that was basically right before the big jump happened. I had the opportunity to see him, and he was outstanding. And then obviously there's some other players that were in Nashville that did really good as well. But I don't know if that's exactly what they're hoping for, to bring up just all those prospects and just hope that something sticks, throw a couple darts at the wall, and hopefully one of them lands on a triple or a bullseye. I just don't think that's the case for this strategy. I just don't see that happening. As for this rotation, you're completely right. They could rebuild if they want to very quickly. If we found out that Corbin Burns was on the market, name a player, any player, that player can be traded for Corbin Burns. Every single team would go out to try and find Corbin Burns. Freddie Peralta would be another big one. If they wanted to move on for him, he's young enough he could stay with the rebuild if they wanted to make him the next ace for the rebuild, if you really wanted to. But you got Brandon Woodruff and Corbin Burns, who arguably could both be an ace on some of the maybe some team in the MLB, not just Milwaukee. They could really rebuild fast, if you will. There's a lot of rumors about them blowing up this rotation, and I'm with you. I'm 100% with you. It just doesn't make any sense what they're doing right now to make you think that not at least one of those arms that we've just discussed has to be on their way out. It has to be, especially maybe not in this offseason, but maybe they give it one more half a season go. And maybe in the trade deadline, they decide, okay, we got to go to nuts and bolts here.
Yeah, and I would have thought that given how busy December was with regard to all of the offseason moves that happened, you would have thought that would have been the time. But in reality, maybe the smartest play of all is just waiting out all of that. And then last team standing with a plethora of starting pitching, the offers are going to look pretty good at that point, right? Because the season's about to start, teams are going to get more and more desperate. And if you're a competitive team, looking with designs on a postseason spot, maybe, just maybe, with a Corbin Burns or Brandon Woodruff available, that's awfully tempting, right? So maybe it's a smart, slow play. I wish I felt that was actually what's going on here, but it could end up to be that way because there's still lots of time left in the off season for something like that to happen.
All right, bold prediction alert. We got one coming right here. Here's my thoughts on this one while it's fresh in the head. I'm going to say that the Brewers are going to try for one half of the season. They're going to see if they can get themselves where they were at the beginning of last year, the top of the division. They feel good. They don't have a lot of injuries. If for some reason they are a bubble team or they are doing a lot worse than expected, let's say second place by a mile or even third or fourth in the division, then we see one of those players out the door, maybe even both. They decide, okay, that's the time for the rebuild come the deadline. I don't know if that's even a big, bold prediction, but let me even go farther then. If they are a bubble team, Corbin Burns is not a Milwaukee Brewer by the end of the season. How's that?
Yeah, and I love it. I love it. The only issue I see with it is that it's a few months later than they should be considering it.
I agree.
Right. In all honesty, like if we're talking about the Milwaukee Brewers, you're going to get just that much more value out of a Corbin Burns if it's done in the offseason as opposed to at the trade deadline. Right. So it's almost like, I get it. You want to give it one last go for your fans, and maybe we can pull some magic out of here. But if you're being realistic, and you and I, who, we don't necessarily follow the Milwaukee Brewers as closely as some people do, from the outside, it certainly looks like now is the time, as opposed to waiting to see, fingers crossed, that maybe the division is weak enough that you can make a run for it. But I wouldn't be taking that approach. That's for sure.
No, not at all. Not in a division that it looks like almost every single team has made some sort of addition to improve, especially the teams who are already towards the top. So, looking at the Cardinals and then now the Cubs, they are right in the thick of it. So I'm right with you at this one. All right, last conversation here about the Brewers. It's got to be about Christian Yelich. Kind of the same kind of situation with Cody Bellinger ever since that season where both Bellinger and Christian Yelich battled for the MVP. They after that both of them have completely just fell off the face of the earth. Really, the Brewers have struggled offensively ever since Christian Yelich has struggled offensively at the plate as well. There has been some injuries, but that is not the only reason why Yelich is struggling. I think he's just having a hard time at the plate. He's been doing it for a very long time in Milwaukee. Are we going to ever see him return back to MVP form? And if so, is it with the Brewers?
No, I don't think we are. I think that's what sometimes we forget about when you have players like a Mike Trout, for example, who are just perennial MVP candidates. We kind of get spoiled in thinking that that's a normal performance, a Shohei Ohtani performance, or even a Vlad Jr. performance, who lost just to Shohei Ohtani. Those are kind of exceptional performances, right? And so the year that the Christian Yelich was at that MVP form, you can't bank on that lasting, right? And that's the risk. When we talk about Rafael Devers and the long-term deals, right? That's the risk that teams take on when they sign these deals, these long-term deals, is that there's going to be decline, right? And for some people, it happens sooner than later. So for some people, it happens, like falling off a cliff, and other people, it's a more gradual decline, right? And what we're seeing right now in Christian Yelich, I don't want to say whether it's surprising or not, but what I will say is that we're not going to see the previous Miami Marlins version of Christian Yelich anytime soon. And it's unfortunate, because you don't want to see, you wish guys could play forever. I still wish Carlos Delgado was swinging it for Toronto. Yeah. So you hate to see it, but it is a natural part of the game. And unfortunately for Christian Yelich, I don't think we're going back there, right? Which is funny because just a quick little story. Back when he was playing for Miami and there was talk that he was going to be traded, Toronto Blue Jays fans were like, "We want him now. Bring him in, bring him in, bring him in." And I remember talking to President Mark Shapiro on the phone about this, and we were just talking about, not specifics, obviously, because he would never tell me anything like that, but just in general terms about looking at trading future value, right? And what can you expect out of a Christian Yelich over the next 10 years versus, and at the time, Vladdy hadn't come up yet. So if you compare the next 10 years of Vladdy versus the next 10 years of Christian Yelich, it kind of makes it, it's a no-brainer. You keep Vladdy, right? So it's just interesting to me because this idea of future value, Christian Yelich is a cautionary tale at this point, right? And the Milwaukee Brewers are like having to deal with it.
Yeah, it truly is a cautionary tale. It makes you wonder why a lot of these teams are not afraid to sign these 11, 12, 13-year contracts they've done in the offseason. Really, ever since Yelich signed his extension, and might I add, it was only a 7-year extension, not 11, not 12, not 13, $188 million, which was a lot a few years back before they started doing the $300 million contracts. He's only in year 3 of his 7-year deal. He is not a UDFA until 2030. And that's basically when his career will be over. So not only, and I asked the question if he'll be back in MVP form and if he'll ever be with the Brewers, or if he'll ever be with the Brewers in MVP form. I think he will be, because I don't know if they're going to find a way to get rid of him unless they do the Eric Hosmer kind of trade where they do a blockbuster for someone else and say, well, you got to take Hosmer. Let's get Hosmer out of here. And then and then somehow the Boston Red Sox get a hold of him. So I'm with you. I really would love to see Christian Yelich take that next step forward and get back to where he was, or at least just be productive, because to be completely honest, he's not even, it's not just that he's not MVP form. He's not all-star form, and he's a starter. That's about it. And, that's good enough for a lot of people in Major League Baseball. I mean, I can't be a starter, but when you see where he was at one point in time, it's just almost disappointing. I'm sure he's not worried about his pocketbooks whatsoever, but I'm sure he wants to get his progress going as well. The Brewers need it.
Oh yeah.
They absolutely need it. All right, so where we sit with the Brewers right now, you already heard my bold take. But before we're gonna get our predictions at the end here. But as you know, this team, I'm gonna call them the Brewers bubble for me, because that's exactly where I'm feeling this team is going to be all season long. I don't know if there's ever going to be a time where we see them in the lead in the NL Central because of just how many question marks I have for Milwaukee, Sean.
Yeah, no, I agree. I would agree with that 100%. The only thing that would keep them in any kind of race is that starting rotation and Rowdy Tellez. So, the chances are not good for them.
Well, there's one good trade that worked out for Milwaukee. Rowdy Tellez was a pretty good trade for them. I know it was on behalf of Toronto, but so far, at least there's something that they can, they'll tip their hat to.